Hey friends, welcome to Homegrown Florida. I'm Katrina, and today we're going to be talking about herbs and spices. I'm going to share with you 30. That's right, 30 different herbs and spices that you can grow in your garden, even in a warm climate. I use them for lots of different things. First, culinary. I think that's what most of us are used to using them as in recipes. But I also love them in teas. I love them in seasoning, so I make my own dried seasoning. You can make herbal remedies for health and immune boosting. You can also use them for cleaning projects and even skincare. They are so versatile. I really didn't love growing herbs when I first started gardening, and it's mainly because I just didn't think like they were really great at production. I mean, what am I going to do? Eat a whole bowl of basil? That doesn't seem that appealing. But as I've gone on in my gardening journey, I have realized all the things that you can do with them. And now they take up a huge space in my garden. Well, not huge. They take up an entire green stalk, and now they're bleeding into the beds. So I have herbs everywhere. And herbs are great for beginners. This is a common thing that you hear out on the internet is that beginners are great to start with herbs because of multiple reasons. The first one being herbs are typically smaller plants. So they can be contained in containers. You don't need this huge garden. You can even use a windowsill in your house to grow your herbs. The other reason is a lot of them are perennial, which means you plant them once and you never have to plant them again. And perennials in general, at least to me, are just easier. They need less. They don't require as much as our fussy annual vegetable garden. And then the third craziest reason is the return on investment. If you've ever bought fresh herbs at the grocery store, they are expensive. Even dried herbs in the seasoning aisle, they're expensive when you think about the quantity that you're getting. So taking an easy to grow plant and using it in your garden is a huge return on investment. Before we jump into them though, I wanted to mention two things. First, I'm going to be using the term herbs and spices interchangeably here. There is a difference between them, but I'm kind of focusing on how they're used, not necessarily their scientific way of determining them. So just bear with me, give me a little grace on that one. The second thing I want to mention is I'm going to be mentioning a lot about what I use these for in terms of herbal remedies. Herbal or medicinal qualities of herbs, you always want to check with your healthcare provider before you introduce those into your diet or into your wellness routine, because they can produce side effects and they may not be good for somebody who's taking a certain kind of medication where it will interact with it, or they may not be good if you have a certain kind of medical condition and it could, make that worse. So always talk to your doctor first. Because we're going to be talking about 30 different herbs and spices, I am going to put timestamps and chapters down into the description below so that way if you only want to know about one herb versus all of them, you can jump right to that spot in the video. So I have my list and we're going to start with basil. Now basil is a super popular herb that you can grow, and it is an annual. Most of them are an annual. There is something called like the African blue basil, which is a perennial type of basil. Pollinators absolutely love it. But this basil right here is your typical Genevieve basil. There are lots of different kinds of basil, like Thai basil. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there with slightly variations in flavor. Now, to grow this, my big tip is you want to start from seed, because it is really easy to start from seed, but you have to direct seed it sown just on the very top of the soil with a tiny bit of soil sprinkled on top. Not too much, because it will not germinate and push through the soil if it is too deep. So you want to make sure that it's not very deep, but at the same time you have to keep it moist. And I have had a lot of trouble being able to do that in my very hot Florida garden, because the evaporation, the water comes right up out of the soil. So my way of doing it is to put it in an area that is super shaded, especially towards our warmer months. Now, the way that you use this is actually the leaves. This is the part that you eat, as I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. Oh, love the smell of basil. It is so good. I usually like to use this in culinary dishes. So pesto is a really cool way to use up a lot of basil if you have a lot of basil, and it freezes very beautifully. The other way I like to use it is in my Italian seasoning mixes. I dry things like oregano, parsley, basil, lots of herbs, and I put it into a blend for my Italian seasoning. But unfortunately, basil doesn't hold on to its taste and smell once it's dried like some other herbs do. So unfortunately, it's not like the best dried. Now, if you have a freeze dryer, that is ideal for something like basil. And then the last thing I wanted to give you a tip about is that the more you harvest it, the less likely it is to bolt. If you start to see the flowers getting tall on top, or the flower sprouts coming out on top, just start clipping the top. And don't be shy, guys. Cut a lot of it. I usually wait till it gets about this height, and then I cut the whole top of it off. And then every week I just come through and keep cutting it off. The more you cut, the more it's going to branch, the bushier it's going to get, more basil you're going to get. And the longer its life will be because you keep cutting it off from being able to flower. The next one on the list is bee balm. Now, bee balm comes in both annual and perennial types. I grow the annual one, particularly something called a lemon mint. I know it's not mint, it's actually bee balm, but it's called lemon mint bee balm. The trick to growing bee balm is that it needs a lot of time, and I did not expect this when I started growing it. The plant stayed very, very small for a really long time, and then all of a sudden it starts pushing out these huge long shoots of flowers, and then it flowers obsessively. And the more you cut off, just like with the basil, the more you cut off the flowers, the more it's going to produce. Then I take those flowers and I dry them, and then I use them in different herbal remedies. Typically, the way that bee balm is used is, number one, as a salve or ointment for bee stings. Bee balm, bee stings, it kind of makes sense, right? The other way that I like to use is for colds and coughs. It does help with reducing the symptoms and reducing the amount of time that you're sick for. I use it in a bee balm oxymel. If you did not see my herbal remedy video, I'm going to put that down in the description below. You can check that out. The next one, and this isn't necessarily an herb or a spice, but actually a fruit plant or a fruit bush, is a berry bush, is this guy right here, which is my blackberry. I'm going to combine this and talk about both raspberries and blackberries. Their leaves are actually really good in teas. They are highly medicinal. They help with all kinds of things. It's like a huge long list. Now, this is a perennial, and the big trick of growing this guy in your garden is you want to make sure that you're getting a variety that is best for your particular area, specifically how many chill hours you get. These do require chill hours, which means number of hours under 40 degrees in a season, like a winter season. If they don't get the amount of chill hours that they're expecting to get, they will not fruit. But if you're growing them just for the leaves, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. I like to take the leaves and cook them down. They do require to be cooked. You can't eat them raw. And so you can dry them and crush them and put them in your tea. Or like what I like to do is when I'm making my tea and I'm boiling the water for my tea, I will drop the leaves into the boiling water for about 5 or 10 minutes and then pull that off the stove and put my regular tea in, my white tea or my green tea, and then I'll let all that simmer together, and then you just strain it out and there's your tea. And that's actually what we keep in our house as iced tea. We cool it down, add ice to it, a little bit of honey, and it is amazing. We drink it every day, and it's a great way to increase the amount of herbs in your diet. The next one on our list is borage, and I grow this typically during our fall and winter months is when it does best, not so much during the summer months. Borage, the thing that I've really learned about it, first off, it's an annual herb. It is not a perennial. So unlike a lot of our herbs and spices, this one is not one that's going to keep coming back every year, although it does reseed itself if you allow it to. Borage, I grew it in my green stock, and it didn't do great. And I'm not sure if that's because of the restriction of the roots in the container, or if it had to do with the fact that this is a very shady spot. My guess would be both. So if you are going to grow it, you may want to go with a very large container, and you may want to go with a very sunny spot. It will produce more flowers that way. Now, the parts that you eat is the leaves and the flowers. So I like to use them in my iced tea, like we talked about with the blackberries. But You do want to be careful with borage because if you take large amounts or for a long period of time, it can cause problems with your liver, especially if you have a predisposed condition around that. Traditionally, borage is usually used for the flowers, and they put them in salads as like a culinary thing. It's a pretty flower. It tastes like a cucumber. I like to use it for that iced tea, but also I make a medicinal tincture that I use for anxiety and sleep. And as long as you're using that, ever so often and not every single day over a long period of time, it should be fine. Next one we have here is Calendula. Now, this is been out for a while now, and it's heading towards the end of its life, but it's still producing quite a bit of flowers. The flowers are getting smaller. They were much larger the first couple rounds of production. This one is an annual, but there are perennial types. It's also called a pot marigold. I think it's like in the same family. And to use them, you just harvest the flowers like this, and I dry them out and I put them in a salve. So I take the flowers once they're dried, and then I fill it up with like an olive oil or an avocado oil or even a coconut oil, and I let it infuse for 6 weeks. And then once it's infused, I drain out the flowers, I mix it with some melted beeswax, and then you can add all kinds of essential oils, and then it creates a salve. And the salve you can use for all kinds of skin conditions: scrapes, scratches, burns, sunburn, lots of things. And it's called a hippie neosporin because it does have antibiotic properties in it. The trick with this guy in growing it is, number one, this from seed is very, very easy. It does germinate quickly and produce very fast for a flower or an herb. A lot of the times you have to wait quite a bit of time for these guys, but this one grows really, really fast. And I have found the more you pick off these flowers, the more that they're going to produce. So pick off as many as you possibly can, but leave a few so that way you can save the seeds from it, and then you never have to buy calendula seeds again. Next up, we have catnip. Sorry, it's getting hot out here, guys. Catnip is actually new to my garden. I haven't grown it before. I had a hard time starting it from seed, so I did go out and actually buy a plant and put it in my green stock, and it has been doing really great. Now, the thing to know about catnip is it does attract cats. So I thought it would be a perfect candidate to live in my green stock in one of the upper shelves, so that way it doesn't attract all the cats from the neighborhood. Catnip, the way that you use it is the leaves. So you're going to pick these leaves off and you can dry them. You can do them for a lot of different things. The most common use is you create catnip for cats. You dry it and you give them some catnip, and I guess it kind of makes them a little crazy, but in humans, it actually creates relaxation. It has the opposite effect, which I think is really interesting. And so I put this, or I bought this specifically to put in my sleepy time tea. So I have borage, chamomile, lemon balm, and now I'm going to be adding catnip. All herbs that are great for sleeping and relaxation. This is a short-lived perennial, which means it's probably going to live for a couple of years and then it's going to start to fade out. And you're going to have to either replant it or take cuttings and try to reproduce the plant again. The next one on the list is cilantro or culantro. Not even sure if I'm pronouncing that second one right. This is an annual herb. You do want to grow it during our fall and winter season because it does bolt super, super fast. And I hear this from all of my friends who grow cilantro. I do not. I'm one of those weird people who think cilantro tastes like soap. Thankfully, my husband's the same way. We both. It doesn't taste right to us. It tastes very funny. So we don't grow it in our garden. But if you do want to grow it in your garden, there is another type called culantro, C-U-L. And it is called the Mexican coriander is another name for it. And it actually does a lot better in our warm climate. It doesn't bolt as fast and it will last longer into the season than cilantro. And in fact, if you really like the taste of cilantro, I'm told that culantro is actually more potent than cilantro. So if you like it for your culinary dishes, this is the one that you might want to use. And another really cool thing about it is when you dry cilantro, it doesn't really have the same flavor. But because culantro is more potent or stronger, it's going to hold more of that flavor in dried herbs. And then of course you can always freeze dry, which will hold a lot more of that flavor. The next herb on the list is chamomile. I am in love with chamomile. I did grow it in my garden, and I have started growing it in my arrow garden inside. That's how much I love it. There's two types of chamomile. There's Roman chamomile, which is a perennial, and then there's German chamomile, which is an annual. The Roman doesn't necessarily do that well down here. It's also not as potent if you're using it for medicinal qualities, where the German is more potent and it grows down here. The trick to growing it, the seeds are microscopic tiny. I mean smaller than carrot seeds. They are tiny, tiny, tiny. And they have to be surface sown because they need light to germinate, and they will dry out super fast in this environment. So one of the best ways to grow it is to create a greenhouse over it. So once you sprinkle the seeds down, put a cover over it. So the way that I do it is I take one of those covers that go on top of the dome trays. You can also use a cut up like milk jug and put it on top. Just cut the top off so that you can open the cap to let air in, and then put it on top, and it will hold the moisture in the ground there until it sprouts. It does sprout pretty quickly, which is awesome. Its common use is sleeping, right? It's a sleepy tea. If you go in the tea aisle and you look up a tea that's going to help you sleep, it will most certainly have chamomile in it. You also see it in baby skincare products. They'll include chamomile as like a calming agent for the baby. I like to use it in my sleepy time tea along with all those other things that I mentioned like catnip and lemon balm and borage. So the way that you use it is once they start to flower and they put off these little flowers, you're going to pick them off and dry them. The more you pick, the longer they will produce. The minute you allow one of those flowers to kind of die out, it basically tells the plant that it's done. So really, really do your best to try to pull all those flowers off so that it produces another round of flowers. And that way the plant is like trying to reproduce itself at fast rates. The other thing I want to mention, which was the mistake I made, I planted 4 plants out in my garden bed, and I thought that they were so delicate and small little plants that they needed shade. Wrong answer. Don't make the mistake like me. Chamomile likes the full sun, and even though it looks kind of like a wispy, wimpy annual plant, it wants that sun. So give it full sun and it will grow well. The next one we have is Citronella. So I had a hard time starting Citronella from seed, so I actually went out and just bought a plant, and it is doing very well. The smell is absolutely amazing. It's kind of like this citrusy, herby kind of smell. It's really, really good. Now, the downside about Citronella is, as much as we all think that Citronella helps with mosquitoes, there have been a lot of studies that kind of debunks that. Actually, lemongrass is better for mosquitoes than Citronella is. But Citronella is really a fun plant to grow regardless. It is a perennial, so it's going to last a really long time. I found it easier just to buy it rather than trying to start it from seed. They're not super expensive, and with a perennial, it's going to last forever. So you're really only making one purchase and it goes the distance. Its most common use is as a mosquito repellent, but unfortunately, I think that is not really its primary purpose. What I like to use it for now that I realize that it's not the best for mosquitoes is I do still use it in my mosquito repellent spray, but it's mainly for scent. Because some of those herbs and the alcohols and stuff give off a scent that isn't necessarily pleasing. By adding a bunch of Citronella, it's getting that lemony, herby scent so that you don't smell like chemicals. The next one up on the list is Comfrey. Comfrey is a perennial, and it does okay growing down here. David the Good did a really good video on Comfrey and the pros and the cons to growing it down here. Now, he mentioned that one of the most common uses of Comfrey is chop and drop, but there is medicinal qualities for Comfrey, particularly around wound care, injuries, bruises, scrapes, scratches, cuts, all those things. Comfrey is really good at helping. Now, I haven't grown Comfrey in my garden yet, I don't know if I have room, but I'll make room. And I am going to give it a shot. And when I do, my plan is to use it for its medicinal qualities for wound care. I'll mix it with my calendula that we just talked about into my salve with the beeswax to create a even more well-rounded wound care medicinal recipe. I want to warn you though, the FDA has banned Comfrey as ingested. So the FDA banned the use of supplements that has Comfrey in it for more than just skincare, and when you ingest it, it's not necessarily that good for you. Next one on the list is cumin. I have tried growing cumin so many times, so many times. It just doesn't like me. I can get it to germinate, but once it is very young, it dies off on me very, very quickly. It's very, wimpy little plant, and it doesn't seem to take off like I would like it to. I have tried it in the green stalks. I have tried it out in the beds. I have started it in trays. I started direct seeding. None of those things have really worked out for me. So my next one to try, which typically works every single time, is to start it in the arrow garden, which I will be doing. Now, the way that you use cumin, I think you can eat the leaves, but typically what you do is you allow it to flower and go to seed, and you save the seeds of the cumin, and that is what people powder up into seasonings, and that's my plan. I am going to take the seeds, I'm going to grind them up, and I'm going to use them as cumin in my taco seasoning. Then we have dill. I grow tons and tons and tons of dill. Lots of dill. Believe it or not, I don't eat that much dill, but I do grow lots of it for multiple reasons. Now, it is an annual, and it does grow during the cooler months, so think fall and winter. And it starts kind of slow, but then it really gets tall, and it gets these great big huge fronds. You can grow them in a green stock or in a container. I've done it. They do very well. But the way that I really love to grow them is mixed in with brassicas. So cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, all of those, because it does repel insects. And I have found, not 100% if this is a reason, but I have found that I never have problems with pests on my brassicas. And I think it's because I interplant dill all the way around. So I grow tons of dill. The parts of the dill that are edible is the fronds, or like the leaves, as well as the seeds. The fronds you'll use like in culinary purposes. It's great with fish, with chicken. It tastes phenomenal. It's a very unique taste. I'm not sure I can explain what it tastes like. Dill is commonly used in dill pickles. So if you take that dill flavor that you get from dill pickles, that's kind of like what it tastes like, but not the pickled part. I'll take the dill seeds as well as the dill fronds, and I will dry them, and I will put that in my pickling spice. Then we have Echinacea. Echinacea is this little guy right here, very, very tiny. I have tried starting it from seed a number of times. This is probably the 10th or 12th plant that I started. I have a couple other ones that don't look like they're gonna make it, but this guy is doing very well. I start them in seeds in trays, and then I transplant them out once they get big enough. So this guy was about half this size when I transplanted him out, and the transplanting process has been difficult for him. But if you direct seed, I have done that before. Unfortunately, I think mine didn't work out because they did get shaded out. So I realized that maybe they like full sun. So this bed right here is a full hot Florida full sun. And this guy's doing pretty well. He's growing quickly. They may not flower the first year. A lot of the times the first year of a perennial, which this one is, will create a lot of greenery. It will get big and bushy, and it won't flower until the next year. But be prepared that when it does flower, you can use this in a number of ways for cold medicines. Commonly, Echinacea, you'll find it in a lot of like homeopathic cold medicines. And they use not only the flowers, the leaves, but also the roots to create their medicine. We can use it by creating it as a tincture. So what I will do once this guy gets big is before it blooms, which, will be 2 years, I can start taking the leaves. I'm going to wait till it gets, pretty substantial and high. And I can start taking the leaves, infuse it in glycerin or alcohol, and create a tincture from it. And then you can take drops of that when you're starting to feel sick. But the one thing that I'm really excited to try is to make Echinacea vitamin gummies. And I'm kind of thinking I'm going to do that with some moringa and some Echinacea, and a few other really immune boosting herbs. Next one on our list is not necessarily an herb or a spice, it's actually a berry bush, and that is elderberry. Elderberry is a perennial tree, berry bush tree, not exactly sure, but it produces these little like blackish bluish colored berries. Now, elderberry does require 2 trees to produce. I put this guy in hopes to find out if there is wild or natural native elderberry in my area where the bees might bring it over here. And I haven't been 100% sure yet if that worked or not. I may have to actually go buy another elderberry tree in order for this one to produce. So growing tip, either get 2 or you can test it out like I did. Now, the only part of the elderberry that you can eat is the berries and not raw. They should be processed in some way, whether that's in jams, jellies, dried, cooked, boiled, something. They have the properties of cyanide like chia has. There's a lot of vegetables in the garden that have this, and the only way to release that gas out so that you don't consume it is to cook it in some way, and elderberry is exactly the same. Now, the way that most people use elderberry is in homeopathic cold medicines, just like the Echinacea, right? And you'll see it a lot in those cold medicines, and what I plan on doing with it is to make cough drops. I'm gonna make an elderberry syrup, which you just take the elderberries and you boil it with water and try to get that water to infuse with the elderberries, smushing them, doing whatever you can to really release that flavor. Cooking it for about 45 minutes. And then once it has reduced down and it's really thick, then you're gonna strain off the actual elderberries just so you have the syrup. And you can take that syrup and mix it with other things like ginger and make cough drops. So immune boosting cough drops, which I think is gonna be a lot of fun. Hopefully this guy produces. I'm out here in the front yard and I have a few herbs out here that I wanted to share with you. Maybe not necessarily herbs. This guy, the little guy right behind me right here, is FireBush. FireBush is, there's lots of different kinds, but there is a native Florida FireBush that you may want to check out. It is a great addition to the garden. It is such a helper with pollinators, but it also has medicinal qualities. The part of the FireBush that you consume are the leaves, the stems, and possibly the berries. You can eat the berries. They are edible. They don't taste that great from what I understand, but people do mix the berries with sugar and create jams and jellies because the color is very pretty. The way that I intend to use it is as a tea. So I'll take the leaves or even maybe the berries and I'll boil them down and I'll mix them in my iced tea. And that's gonna help with female issues like cramps, as well as a diuretic in case you have stomach issues that are not doing very well. This is gonna be a great plant for that. All around, number 1, make sure you get some FireBush. We're in the house and the next one on our list is garlic. Garlic technically isn't an herb or a spice, but it is a vegetable that we use very commonly in seasonings. So that's why I'm including it on this list. Now, garlic is an annual. Now, this guy right here does take a bit of effort. It is a little bit of a diva in the garden. It does require a little bit. Down here in the south, you have to do something called vernalization. I'm going to put a video to my end-to-end how to grow garlic in your Florida or southern garden down in the description below, so you can check that out. There's several steps. We are not like up north where you just pop it in the ground and forget about it. That does not happen here in Florida. There is some work that you have to do to get it going. Now, garlic can be used for lots of things. I know people that use garlic as like a dewormer for, their animals. I don't necessarily do that, but the one way that we use it the most is culinary. So we eat a lot of garlic. We eat fresh garlic like this, dried, cured. I also mince it up and put it in oil in ice cube trays and freeze it. So that's another great way to preserve it. And I dry it and I make garlic powder, which I absolutely love. A new way that I'm using garlic is in medicinals, particularly my fire cider. Fire cider is a great medicinal to help kind of activate or boost your immune system. Maybe we're going into cold and flu season. Maybe you're about to go travel on an airplane or where you're going to be with lots of different people. You can take fire cider to help, make you resist some of those bad bugs out there. Now the next one on our list here is ginger, and you're probably like, Patrina, why is your ginger all wet? It's kind of wet and slippery right now, but that's because I'm rooting it. You can see there's these little spikes coming off of it, and that's actually where it's starting to root. And those are going to go on the ground very, very soon. Now, ginger is a perennial, but the one thing you have to know about it is that it reproduces or propagates itself using rhizomes, which is like part of the root structure. The rhizomes, if you pull the whole plant out to harvest the ginger and you don't leave some back, it will not recreate itself. It needs that rhizome or that root in order to recreate more ginger. Now, ginger is used in lots of culinary dishes, but you can not only use the roots, you can also use the leaves. They're not as potent as the roots, but you can make a really nice light ginger powder with it that you can use in maybe some of your Thanksgiving treats. Think gingerbread man. And use the roots for more of the culinary purpose. And I treat it very much like garlic, where I'll mince it up and put it in the freezer in oil in ice cream trays, or you can dry it out a bit and it will last on the counter for quite a while. Another one in our front yard garden is this guy behind me, and this is goldenrod. Aim to get goldenrods that are native to your area. So this is called a slender goldenrod. I think there is also a seaside goldenrod. There's a lot of different kinds that are native to Florida, and it's just going to be easier for you to grow. They just do well in our sandy soil, and they don't really need a lot of help. It is a perennial. It's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger every single year. And you can take the leaves and the flowers from this guy and use it in medicinal things. Probably the most widely known use for goldenrod is for urinary health. So my plan, once this guy gets a little bit bigger, is to dry off some of the leaves and save it for teas in case you start to feel something like a UTI, or even a yeast infection is known to be helped by the goldenrod. Of course, with many medicinals, you're gonna want to start taking these things very early on. Don't wait until you're in the throes of the worst infection you've ever had. But right when you have a hint of that, taking medicinal remedies really do help to ward it off or to make it less severe. All right, next one on the list, lavender. Now, I have tried to grow lavender from seed so many times in all the different ways that I can possibly try to grow lavender, and it has not worked out, so I just went and bought a plant. Now, this is a perennial, so once again, this is gonna live and keep growing over and over and over. It might die back during the winter, but then it's just gonna come back and create more. Now, I've cut most of the flowers off this one, and I'm drying those and saving those for a bunch of medicinal recipes. Lavender is good for so many things, but I think the number one thing that I plan on using it for is the scent. It smells so good, y'all. It is smelling so, so good. And even dried, it still has that scent. So you can use it potpourri, you can use it in skincare products, bath salts, soaps, lotions, all kinds of stuff. Although medicinally, it is really well known for reducing anxiety, and the smell you can take in, and supposedly it helps with headaches. So you can create a steam that you can breathe in if you're having like a migraine or a headache, which I think is pretty cool. But honestly, it's the smell. It just smells amazing. And you can use both the flowers and the leaves, although the leaves don't have that scent to them. Next up is lemon balm. This stuff grows so easy. Almost too easy, you guys. It is almost invasive. I hate to call it that because that's such a bad thing to say, but you really need to be careful about growing lemon balm, because lemon balm does spread, and rather aggressively. If you put it in ground or in a bed, it's going to take over that space. It grows actually from the roots. So you would have to try to get all of those roots out, which is very difficult. Even the tiniest amount left behind will just regrow the entire garden. So that's why it is now taking up its own tier in my green stock. This is the easiest way that I can contain it. I can keep it in the green stock and cut from it all I want. I use this in our iced tea or iced herbal tea. I dry a bunch of these off and put it in our tea, but you can also use it culinary. It has a lemony taste to it, so a lot of the times people use it as a lemon herb. Then we have lemongrass. Now, lemongrass is a perennial and it's going to keep growing in your garden, but you do have to start it out by getting a I want to say a cutting, but it's not a cutting because you need part of the roots. You've got to like split the roots off and take one whole, section of the lemongrass. That's how it propagates. That's how it spreads itself. Lemongrass is used in a lot of culinary dishes. I'm thinking of like a Thai salad, in lots of soups and all kinds of stuff. It gives off that lemon taste and it's very, very good. Now, the part that you eat is the stalk, right? But the innermost stalk. So the outer stalk of the leaf is very tough and rough. But if you peel that back, there's an inner stalk, and the closest to the base of the plant, that's going to be white. And that's the part that you use. You can also release the flavor by kind of hitting or smashing the stalks and just kind of soaking them in your soups. Now, my biggest plan for my lemongrass that I just got is once it's grown up and it's a little bit bigger, my plan is to use it in a mosquito spray. So unlike the citronella, lemongrass is actually determined as something that has proven true in, keeping mosquitoes away. So I am going to add the citronella, but I'm also going to add the lemongrass into a spray that you can put on your body that will help keep away the mosquitoes instead of spraying a chemical. This little guy right here is an interesting one. This is marshmallow. Marshmallow, yes, you heard it. This is actually the plant that gave the marshmallow its name. And the part of the plant that you eat is the roots. It is a perennial, so you do have to leave some roots down in there to let it grow, kind of like with the ginger. It is not sweet like a marshmallow, but it has that thick gelatinous type texture, and that is what people use for coughs. So that is what it was normally used for as a medicinal, but they added sugar to it and made it a confection, and then eventually they moved away from using actual marshmallow plant to using things like corn oil and gelatin and things like that. You could still create marshmallows from the marshmallow plant if you wanted to go through that cycle or process. My plan is to use it either as a cough drop or as that coating mechanism in teas when you have a cough or cold. Then we have milk thistle. In some parts of the country, milk thistle grows like a weed. Apparently not for me, because milk thistle, I have tried numerous times to start it from seed and it has not worked out for me, but I am still trying, and I'm going to try the arrow gardening next. Milk thistle is a biannual, so it lives for 2 years, produces seeds, and then dies off. You can eat the leaves, the flowers, and the seeds. It's mostly known for its ability to help the liver functions. My little girl, Chloe, one of our puppies, she was born with elevated liver functions, and we have tried giving her traditional medicines the vet has prescribed everything here. And she has not reacted well to them. She has very sensitive reactions to medication. Might be due to her size. It might be due to a genetic issue. We're not really sure. But she can't take the traditional medicines to help with her elevated liver functions. So the vet prescribed a different, more homeopathic remedy, which includes milk thistle and SAM-E. So she takes milk thistle in the morning and SAM-E in the afternoon. And that does seem to have lowered the levels. Probably not as well as the regular medications would, but it is going down slowly over time. And so we're hoping that over time she's going to get better, or at least be able to sustain her life like this. Now, milk thistle has side effects. It can be not so great for you. So make sure you talk to your healthcare provider before you start taking on something like this guy. Then we have this guy who's looking a little bit rough down here, and that is mint. Normally mint grows very well for me. It's usually not a problem. Even though it looks rough right now, it's going to fill back in and it's going to be absolutely fine. It's almost impossible to kill this plant. Very much like the lemon balm up here, I have given it its own tier because mint spreads aggressively and it will take over your whole garden. So it has the bottom tier, and I only put 3 plants in this bottom tier. I put peppermint, spearmint, and sweet mint. And over the last couple years, it fills in the entire base. I have to trim it often because the little vines will come down and touch the ground. I'm very concerned it's going to invade into this grassy area around it. It's another reason why this green stalk sits on a concrete slab, so that way if it touches in the back or something, it's not going to spread that way. Now, mint is used in a ton of things, right? It's in culinary, it's in drinks, it's in medicines, it's in skincare, it's in gum, mojitos. Y'all, the sky is the limit with mint. It is a great, great product. Now, the way I use it is I like the taste of mint in my iced tea. So our herbal iced tea, I add the mint to it. Another way I like to use it is the peppermint I will make into a tincture, and that helps aid in digestion if you have indigestion or something. And the last way I plan on using it as a steam. So when you have a cold or flu and you're all congested and all icky, you can boil it and create a steam and breathe that steam in. And mint does, particularly peppermint, helps open up those sinuses and helps you drain off some of that nasty stuff. Now, this little wimpy tree back here is called a moringa, and it is nicknamed the miracle tree because of the amount of nutrients that grow inside this tree. Now, you can eat, I think, like the leaves, the pods, the flowers, the roots, I mean, almost the whole tree. I would say that one thing that you need to know about growing it is that it does require a super hard prune. So the thing that I'm planning to do this winter is I'm going to cut it back to here. I know, it sounds crazy, but moringa does best when it is cut down during the winter and it allows it to grow up and more bushy. And that's what we want. We want more leaves. The leaves are really good for nutrition and protein. Okay, so you can take the leaves and put them into your protein shake in the morning or your smoothie, and that'll give you an extra boost of protein for your day. You can also dry them and put them in capsules and take them or eat them. All that works. Now, this tree is called the miracle tree because it is one of the trees that has been listed as a tree that can fight hunger in third world nations. So they put this tree in, or several of these trees in, and you can literally fight hunger with just this tree. It gives you protein higher than higher than any plant. This produces higher protein, this little wimpy tree. So weird. And it also contains an immense amount of vitamins. So you can keep a tree in your backyard that actually fights hunger in the entire world. I think that's pretty cool. Next one on our list is mustard. Now, mustard technically is a vegetable. It's a green, and that's how a lot of people use it. They use it in salads, or they use it as a cooked green. You've heard of like collard greens and mustard greens cooked down with bacon. It's just amazing. Now, mustard grows during the cooler parts of our season. So fall and winter is when you really want to grow mustard. But I have found it to be pretty heat tolerant, especially the certain varieties that were, developed down here in my area. So they can start in early fall and they can last all the way to late spring before they start to bolt. Now, how are they an herb? Mustard seed. So after you've used your plant for all the greens and the salads and the cooked greens, let it go to seed and don't cut it down. And once those seeds are created, the flowers will bloom and they'll create these little seed pods. They look like tiny green beans, and then those dry. You can collect all those and have mustard seed or ground mustard. You can create your own mustard using the mustard seeds, or I like to use the mustard seeds as a pickling spice. So I add it with my dill weed. It's a monarch back there on the salvia. Sorry. Oh, so pretty. Okay, this big crazy thing right here is my oregano. It is a perennial and it is a spreader. Now, it's not a crazy spreader like lemon balm or mint, which is good, but it does spread and it does branch out. But you can kind of keep it contained. But for that reason, I keep it in the green stock so that it doesn't take over the whole garden, which it will if you allow it to. Oregano is typically used in culinary things, particularly, I think, Italian dishes, but there is a Mexican oregano that's really good too that you can use in Mexican dishes. I like to dry it and keep it in my Italian seasoning blend, but a new way that I learned how to use it is to clip the leaves off, dry or fresh, mix it in with glycerin or alcohol, a high percentage of alcohol like Everclear or vodka. Let it steep for about 6 weeks and then strain the leaves off that mixture, and then you can keep it as a tincture, and it's really good for cough, which I did not know until recently when my brother-in-law told me, and my husband took it when he had a little cough, and apparently it works really well. So a really cool 2-in-1 herb here for food and for medicine. The next one we have right here is parsley. Parsley technically is an annual or biannual. Usually it only lasts a year for me, but this guy that gets a huge amount of shade has lasted, I think it's on its 2nd year now. I think it's almost 2 years, so it should start flowering soon, and then I'll have to replace it. And I really, really love it, so I might take a cutting from it in hopes that I can keep it going. Parsley is very common in culinary dishes, fresh or dry, to put in Italian seasoning blends, as well as many, many other blends. You can mix it with your garlic powder to make like a garlic parsley powder. So good. But another way that I use it is to support wildlife. I found out, accidentally, that swallowtails absolutely love parsley. Love it, love it, love it. So the swallowtail butterfly will land her babies on the parsley, and then they'll grow up and I'll have an immense amount of swallowtails, and I think they're like one of the prettiest butterflies. I mean, monarchs are pretty, but swallowtails are really big and gorgeous. So I grow an excessive amount. I have some here, and I have an even larger patch of the flat leaf. This is the curly leaf, but the flat leaf parsley for the babies to grow up in. And I have found that even though the caterpillars will pretty much devour it, it will grow back super big. This is peachy. Peachy is a peach tree, not an herb or a spice. But peaches, or peach trees, are a perennial fruit tree, and you can use the leaves for herbal teas. Now, the biggest growing tip with growing a peach tree is to make sure that you get a peach variety that has the proper amount of chill time for your area, or chill hours, chill hours for your area, which you can find online. But it's basically how many hours during the winter that your peach tree will be below 40 degrees. The common use for a peach tree is peach leaf tea. So you take these leaves, I like to wait until after the fruit has produced, and I'll take these and I will cook or dry them and powder them and put them in my herbal iced tea blend. It is a great way to kind of amp up nutrition in your herbal teas. All right, we're in the bright part of the garden, but I wanted to share with you one that's not necessarily an herb or a spice. Well, I guess maybe it's considered a spice. It's definitely a vegetable or a fruit. It is the pepper plant, and I have a whole bed of peppers right here. Here's my Cuminellas. They're doing really well. Big peppers. Now, peppers I like to use obviously in cooking. I think that's the most common way. They are an annual plant, so you do have to plant them every single year. And I have found that the way I like to start them, and this is probably contrary to the way a lot of people start them, is I actually seed them in late fall and grow them in pots throughout the winter, and then I plant them, and by that time they're pretty big and they start producing very early in spring. Two of the ones that I absolutely love for a seasoning mix is chili peppers, ancho chili peppers. I grew them last year and made enough chili pepper powder to use in my taco seasoning to cover me for probably 2 or 3 years. The new one I'm growing this year is a paprika pepper. Who would have known? I guess I should have known they were peppers, but I didn't. Now I do. They are the paprika pepper, and you use that. You can roast it, and then you chop it up and put it in the dehydrator and dry it out and make a paprika powder. Another great one for chili seasoning and my taco seasoning mix. Here we have in the green stalks a pineapple sage. Now, I could not find seeds for this, but I did find a plant. So I have been propagating it from the original plant that's over in the other green stalk, and to create this one. You can eat the leaves or the flowers. Now, the flowers actually have a sweet element to them, and they look so pretty in salads. You can freeze them in ice cubes. You can cook them in your teas, and they had a little bit of a sweet element. Now the leaves, while they smell, oh my gosh, you guys, it's like a pineapple and mint together. Outstanding smell. Unfortunately, they don't taste like that. When I got it, I thought that pineapple sage would taste like pineapple. It does not. It smells like pineapple. So if you're going to use this for culinary purposes, just be aware it's not going to add that flavor. A lot of the times I use it in my herbal tea blend just to kind of add more herbs to it. But I think one that I want to do here in the future with it is use that nice smell for scenting my skincare products. So the moisturizers, the creams, the lotions, the ointments, the salves, I can infuse this into those in hopes that I can get that smell there. Now you can't, once you dry them, they smell nothing like it anymore. It really, really needs to be fresh. So I'm going to try infusing this in oil and see if I can get some of that amazing scent out of it. Now, this little guy right here is rosemary, and I actually created this rosemary from a cutting. The original plant lived in my beds and it got huge. I mean, I think it was like 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide. They were huge, and I had 2 of them. And you know how I created them? I bought the fresh rosemary from the grocery store that's in those little plastic containers. It's the sprigs. I peeled the leaves off of most of it except for the top, and then I stuck it in the ground and it grew these giant rosemary bushes. So rosemaries are really good for propagation. So if you have a friend that has one, you can just cut a few sprigs off of them, put them in dirt, and just wait. They will produce. They're a little bit slow growing at first. Like this guy has been, I think, 6 or 7 months, and it's taken that long to get that big. But if you just have patience and wait, it will grow. And it is a perennial, so it is going to last forever. They get so big and so bushy, I decided to take them out of the beds and put them in containers. I have one in here, and I have another one that I'm trying out in my green stock to see if it can handle being in that kind of container, because it does get rather big. Now, rosemary, that's a traditional Thanksgiving herb, right? It is so traditional in Thanksgiving, but it also has another purpose, which is a medicinal purpose for migraines. So I'm going to create a tincture using glycerin or alcohol and make a concentrated rosemary tincture in hopes that that might help some of my migraines. I get really bad migraines and I do have medication for it, but sometimes you might want to try something that is not, that crazy strong medication that kind of sometimes upsets our stomach. So I'm wondering if I can ward off some of my migraines using the rosemary. I'll let you guys know how it goes. The next one on the list is St. John's wort. Now, I have tried multiple times to be able to grow this plant. It is not working out for me, but I'm hoping that if I change up a few things, like the time of year that I grow it, or the conditions in which I grow in, that maybe I'll have better luck. So I haven't given up on it yet, but I think it's important to bring this one up because it does have a lot of really cool uses. You use the leaves and the flowers of St. John's wort. It is a perennial, which is cool. A lot of the time, its most common use is in supplements for depression or mood disorders. But the way that I want to use it is for nerve pain. It is known for helping with nerve pain, and so I'm going to create a tincture that's going to help with that, to help with my sciatica. This guy right here is sage, and just like with the rosemary, I created sage, or propagated sage, from sprigs from the grocery store. It is a perennial, so it is going to keep growing and growing and growing. And at first it grew very slow, and it just seemed unhappy for that first year. But once it went through that winter cycle, it really flourished. So something tells me that this loves cold weather. It's doing better this summer than it did last summer. So last summer it was very, very sad and it didn't look happy, but it just came right back. One thing I've learned about herbs is normally they die back in winter, but sometimes here in Florida, they die back in summer. And I'm going to show you that with our next plant. So the most common use of using sage is in cooking. And so Thanksgiving is like the most common. You put it in your stuffing. So sage, rosemary, thyme, perfect herbs for Thanksgiving. We have another one out in our front garden, and this one is society garlic. If you haven't heard of it or tried it, you have to add this one to your garden. Although I will warn you, maybe not to put it in a space in the garden where there's a lot of traffic or activity, because it has a smell to it. So we put it in our front yard, and the only time that we pass by it or brush against it is when we're coming and going from the house. If it were out in the backyard, the dogs would run past it, I would walk past it, and you would constantly have this smell. Now, what this plant is good for is right in the name, society garlic. It tastes like garlic. but so much stronger. It is extremely potent. So the parts of the plant that you eat are the leaves and the roots, and you can propagate them by separating out the roots, because this thing was only about this big when I started it, and it has slowly started to branch out very much into, you know, its surrounding area, and that's how it's propagating itself. So it will continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you'll have to start to cut it down. The way I like to use society garlic is very much like I use regular garlic. If I'm not having the best garlic harvest year, or I've run out of my garlic, then I will come out here and cut some of the leaves off of this, and then I'll put it in cooked recipes. I don't use it raw. It is very strong, and I love garlic, but that's strong. Another way that you could use it is dry it, and you can create like a garlic powder. But be careful and just make sure you try it and taste it first, because, like I said, very potent. I gave some to my sister to try, and she basically tasted garlic all day long. It was intense. It's got some heat. So I almost don't even want to show you this one because it looks so bad, but hopefully I have some previous pictures of it when it looked better. And that is this guy right here, which is almost completely dead, and that is red vein sorrel. I also have a green sorrel that is doing okay. Sorrel does not like hot temperatures, but if you plant it or grow it during the fall and winter season, it is a perennial. So it's going to be like that example where it dies back during the summer, which is what it's doing. But as long as I keep watering it, in winter, this is going to resprout, and it's going to grow a huge amount of sorrel. Sorrel is an herb that's known for being lemony. And I don't mean mildly lemony, I mean very lemony. So it's great with chicken, it's great with fish. I love it in a lemon iced tea because you can steep these leaves and get that lemon flavor out, and it is phenomenal. Or put it in your salads because it is a really good addition to a salad. It almost doesn't need dressing. Then we have thyme. Thyme is the bane of my existence because I have grown it from seed, I have bought the plants, I have done everything to try to grow thyme, and it just fizzles out and dies on me. It is a perennial, so that should not happen. And I know plenty of people in Florida and southern states that grow thyme with no issue, and they talk about it being just like oregano, like this guy, right? Just constant, like, growing big and you never have to worry about it. Well, that has not been my experience, but I must be doing something wrong and I've got to figure that out. But thyme is another great one that you use during Thanksgiving. You can dry those herbs and put it in things. I think you can even put it in your Italian seasoning, in your herbs de Providence, lots of different seasoning blends. It has a really, really great taste. And so thyme definitely needs to be on the list. And if you have recommendations of what I'm doing wrong with thyme, head down in the comments and leave me a note. We're back in the kitchen and we are talking about this guy, turmeric. I am also soaking this one just like the ginger in order to try to get it to produce those little sprouts from its roots so that I can grow the plant. Turmeric and ginger are very similar to one another in how they grow. They grow from the rhizomes. So once again, if you're going to plant them, do not harvest the whole thing. Leave some of the roots down in there so that it can reproduce itself. Another thing to know about ginger and turmeric is that they like shade. Surprise, here in Florida, something likes shade. So when you are going to plant it or put this plant out in your garden, make sure that you give it quite a bit of shade. Turmeric is used in a ton of different recipes. I know a lot of my old friends from my job were from India and they really used a lot of turmeric, and it is a really great, interesting spice to use. Now, the way that I particularly like to use it, because I'm not super fond of like a heaviness of that flavor, is to color things, right? It's very orange, very like yellowish orange. So when you're making a chicken soup and the broth is just a little light because maybe you make your own broth at home and it doesn't get quite that dark as the grocery store stuff, maybe. But I like to put a little bit of turmeric in it and it will golden it up and it will look absolutely like the best chicken soup you've ever made. And just by putting a little bit will create that color without adding a lot of that taste. Now, turmeric, there is a lot of medicinal qualities for turmeric. It has been used in Eastern medicine for a really long time. I haven't been able to quite pinpoint what its most
helpful medicinal qualities are, but there are some ideas out there that it might help with things like Alzheimer's and memory loss. So just introducing it into your diet in the best way you know how, like putting it in soups or putting it in teas, just a tiny amount, so that way it colors those things, that could really just help us out in introducing that new herb into our diet if it's not something that you use every day.
This flowering tree right here is called a vitex, and it is a perennial and it is a tree. And from what I've noticed, it grows very, very fast. So this guy was super tiny when I got him just a couple months ago, and I've already pruned him down once. I'm gonna have to keep pruning him down because I really don't know where I'm gonna put him yet. He can get quite big, so I'm thinking to see if I can grow it in a pot and keep it very small because I don't need a lot of this. Now, Vitex is mainly used for female support or female vitamins. It is known to help alleviate the symptoms of menopause, premenopause, PMS, premenstrual syndrome, PCOS, I think is what it's called. And you use the leaves and dry them into a powder, and you can mix it with smoothies. You can put it in a capsule and swallow it. You can put it in your teas. There's lots of different ways to ingest it. Doesn't really have much of a taste from my experience. And it's just a really great, simple, really easy plant to grow. It hasn't needed a lot. I mean, that's one of the things I love about perennials, right? A lot of times they don't need much. This guy has not needed anything. I mean, it barely bothers me to water it, you know? It hasn't required much other than pruning it back because it has gotten so, big so quick. So that's our 30. I think it might have been 35, but that's the herbs and spices that we were going to go through today. I know there's lots and lots of different herbs and spices that I probably didn't even mention, but I wanted to focus on the ones that grow well down here in a hot and humid environment to see what kind of things that you could grow in your own garden and all the crazy amounts of uses that you can use these herbs for. It's not just cooking, guys. There are a ton of things you can do with it, and once you dive into that world, oh my gosh, it is addicting and you're going to get sucked in and it is a lot of fun and it's a great new skill to learn. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Happy gardening, guys.